I live in southern Illinois, in a small town where storms are common enough that people barely react unless a tornado siren goes off. I work maintenance for a school district, so my hours start early and end whenever something breaks. Because of that, I'm used to sleeping through thunder, wind, and heavy rain. I've lived in the same one-story house for almost 8 years, and I know every sound it makes when the weather turns bad. That night started like any other severe weather night. The forecast said strong thunderstorms with possible rotation. Nothing unusual for late spring. I grilled dinner, checked the gutters because they clog easily, and made sure my phone was charged. Around 9, the sky turned that flat gray color that always means it's going to rain hard for a long time. By 10, the power flickered twice, but stayed on. I keep a weather radio in my bedroom. It's an older Midland model that I bought after a tornado hit 2 towns over a few years back. Normally, I leave it on silent unless I'm asleep. Then I turn the alert volume up. That night, I turned it on before going to bed, set the volume low, and fell asleep watching reruns. Sometime after midnight, the radio went off. Not loud, just enough to wake me up. It wasn't the alert tone. It was the broadcast voice. Calm, steady, reading out information the way they always do. I remember thinking that was odd, because alerts usually start with the tone first. I lay there for a few seconds, half awake, listening. Severe thunderstorm warning issued for. I rolled over and looked at the radio. The backlight was on. That meant it had triggered automatically. I reached for my phone to check the time. It was 12:47 a.m. The broadcast continued, listing wind speeds and rainfall estimates. Everything sounded normal until it mentioned the county. It named a county that doesn't exist anymore. I didn't catch it at first. I just felt something was off. Then it repeated the county name again as part of the warning area. I sat up in bed and turned the volume up slightly. I won't say the name here, but I knew it because my grandfather used to talk about it. The county had been dissolved decades ago and absorbed into 2 others after population decline. It hasn't been used in official weather reports since before I was born. I figured it had to be a glitch. Old database, bad signal, something like that. Storms mess with electronics. I reached over to turn the radio off. It wouldn't shut off. I pressed the power button once. Nothing. Held it down. Nothing. I unplugged it from the wall, and it kept playing. That's when I realized it was running on the backup batteries. I pulled the radio closer and popped the battery compartment open. The batteries fell out onto the bed. The radio kept talking. At that point, I was fully awake. I stared at the radio like it might explain itself. The voice continued calmly, reading off locations inside the warning area. Roads, intersections, landmarks. Then it said my street name. Not just the street, my full address. I actually laughed at first. A short, nervous laugh, because my brain didn't know what else to do. Weather radios don't do that. They don't announce individual addresses. They don't get that specific. I grabbed my phone and checked the National Weather Service app. There was a thunderstorm warning, but it was generic, county-wide. No mention of addresses. No mention of the dissolved county. The radio kept going. It listed another address, then another. I recognized both of them. One belonged to my neighbor across the street. The other was the house on the corner where an older couple lived. I got out of bed and walked to the front window, staying back from the glass. Rain was coming down hard now, and the wind was picking up. I couldn't see much, but the street lights were still on. The radio changed tone slightly, still calm but slower. It began listing names, full names. The first name was my neighbor's. The second was his wife's. The third was the man from the corner house. Then it said my name. First, middle, last. My chest tightened in a way I'd never felt before. Not panic exactly. More like my body understood something before my mind did. I grabbed the radio and carried it into the living room, away from the bedroom, like putting distance between us might help. I set it on the coffee table. The voice continued. Individuals currently located within the affected structures should move to interior rooms immediately. That sounded almost normal, almost like real weather advice, except it wasn't coming from any real alert. Then it said something that made my hands shake. Basement access is confirmed. I don't have a basement. None of the houses on my street do. The water table is too high. I unplugged the radio again and smashed the power button repeatedly. Nothing changed. I ended up wrapping it in a towel and stuffing it into the hallway closet, shutting the door hard. I could still hear it, muffled but clear enough. I sat on the couch with my phone in my hand, watching radar, watching social media, waiting for someone else to say something. No one did. The storm intensified. The wind started pushing rain sideways. Somewhere nearby, a transformer blew and the power went out. My house went dark except for my phone screen. The radio's voice continued through the closet door. It started repeating the same list of names, over and over, like it was checking attendance. After about 20 minutes, it stopped. No sign-off, no tone, just silence. I waited another 10 minutes before opening the closet door. The radio was off, completely dead. No lights, no sound. The next morning, the storm damage was minor. Branches down, some flooding, nothing serious. I went outside and saw police cars on my street. My neighbor across the road was gone. So was his wife. The corner house was taped off. They said it was carbon monoxide. Generator misuse during the outage. Tragic but explainable. I didn't tell anyone about the radio. I threw it away that afternoon, drove it to a landfill outside town, and left it there. 2 weeks later, during another storm, my phone buzzed with a weather alert for a county that doesn't exist anymore. I was driving west through Missouri for work, hauling equipment for a school renovation project. It was supposed to be a straight shot, 6 hours total, but storms had been rolling across the state all afternoon. By the time I crossed into the more rural stretch of interstate, the sky had gone dark in a way that made it clear this wasn't going to pass quickly. I've driven through plenty of storms. I don't scare easily on the road, but this one felt different in a practical sense. Visibility dropped fast. Rain hit so hard that the wipers couldn't keep up, even on the highest setting. Trucks started slowing down, then pulling over completely. That's usually my sign to stop too. The GPS showed a rest stop about 3 miles ahead. I decided to push for it rather than pulling onto the shoulder. The wind was strong enough that I didn't want to sit exposed on the side of the road with semis passing by. I reached the rest stop just as the storm intensified again. It was one of those older rest areas that hadn't been updated in years. 2 bathroom buildings, a small covered picnic area, and a large parking lot surrounded by trees. No gas station, no staff, just a place to stop and wait. There were only 3 vehicles there when I pulled in. A box truck parked far from the buildings, a sedan with no lights on, and an older pickup closer to the restrooms. I parked under one of the lights near the bathroom building and shut off the engine. The power flickered, then held. The light above me buzzed softly. I sat there for a few minutes, watching the rain blow sideways across the lot. I checked the weather app. Severe thunderstorm warning. Possible rotation. Advising people to seek sturdy shelter. That's when I decided to go inside the restroom building. Not because I needed to use it, but because it was concrete and windowless. If things got worse, it was better than my truck. I grabbed my jacket and stepped out. The wind hit hard enough that I had to lean into it. The rain soaked my sleeves instantly. I jogged to the entrance and pushed the door open. The inside smelled like disinfectant and damp concrete. The lights were on, which surprised me. Usually places like that go dark during storms. The building was empty as far as I could tell. I went into the men's side and stood near the sinks, listening. The storm noise was muted inside. The building felt solid. That's when I realized something small but important. One of the bathroom stalls was locked. I didn't think much of it at first. Someone else could be sheltering there. Maybe the person from the sedan or the pickup. I called out a quick hello, just to avoid startling anyone. No response. I waited a few seconds. Still nothing. I told myself it was fine. People don't always answer. Maybe they had headphones in. Maybe they didn't want to talk. I stood there for about 10 minutes. The storm outside intensified. The building shook slightly with stronger gusts of wind, but nothing alarming. My phone signal dropped to 1 bar. Then the power went out. The lights shut off all at once, leaving the restroom lit only by the faint glow from outside filtering under the doors. It wasn't pitch black, but it was dark enough that details faded. I pulled my phone out and turned on the flashlight. That's when I noticed something else. The stall door that had been locked earlier was now open. I knew it had been closed. I remember checking. I hadn't heard it open. I hadn't heard footsteps. Nothing. I walked closer and shined the light inside. The stall was empty. No one else was in the restroom. No bags. No signs of anyone being there at all. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it made me uneasy. It felt like something had changed without any clear reason. I decided to go back to my truck. When I opened the restroom door, the wind nearly pulled it out of my hand. The rain was even heavier now, and visibility was worse than before. The parking lot looked different in the dark. The overhead lights were out, and only distant lightning flashes lit things up briefly. That's when I noticed the box truck was gone. So was the sedan. Only my truck and the older pickup remained. The pickup's driver's side door was open. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to decide what to do. It didn't feel right to walk back across the lot, but staying in the restroom didn't feel right either. Another gust of wind pushed rain into my face, and I made the decision to run for my truck. I made it inside soaked and breathing hard. I locked the doors immediately, even though I knew how pointless that would be if someone really wanted in. I sat there with the engine off, watching the pickup through the rain-streaked windshield. The open door didn't move. It didn't slam. It didn't sway. It just stayed open. After several minutes, I saw movement near the restroom building. At first, I thought it was just shadows from the lightning, but then I saw it clearly. Someone was standing just outside the restroom entrance. They weren't running. They weren't trying to get out of the rain. They were just standing there, facing the building, like they were listening to something inside. I couldn't make out details. The distance and the rain made it impossible. All I could tell was that they were tall and thin and not dressed for the weather. I stayed still, hoping they hadn't noticed me. Then they turned their head toward my truck. I ducked instinctively, lowering myself so I wasn't visible through the windshield. My heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I stayed like that for a long time, long enough that my legs started to cramp. When I finally lifted my head again, the person was gone. The pickup door was still open. I started my truck, deciding that if I could see the road at all, I was leaving. I didn't care where I ended up as long as it wasn't there. That's when my headlights swept across the picnic area. There were people standing there. At least 3. They were under the roof, staying dry. All of them were facing my truck. None of them moved. I froze. My foot stayed on the brake. The engine idled. They didn't wave. They didn't signal for help. They didn't react to the headlights at all. They just stood there. I backed out slowly, keeping the headlights on them as long as I could. As soon as I reached the exit, I turned hard onto the interstate ramp. The road was barely visible, but I didn't slow down. I didn't stop driving until the storm weakened nearly an hour later. The next morning, I checked the news. There was a brief report about a body found at a remote rest stop overnight. No details, no name, just that authorities believed the person had been sheltering from the storm. I looked up the rest stop on satellite view later. There's no picnic shelter there. I never paid attention to storms until I moved back to my hometown. I grew up in central Indiana, left for a few years after college, then came back when my dad's health started declining. He owned a small piece of farmland on the edge of town. Not a working farm anymore, just open land he refused to sell. When he passed, the land came to me. I decided to build a small house there instead of buying in town. The land is flat, surrounded by cornfields and tree lines. There's one empty field directly across the road from my driveway. No structures, no fence, just grass and dirt that never seems to grow evenly. Locals always called it the low field because it floods during heavy rain. From the first summer I lived there, I noticed something strange during thunderstorms. Lightning always struck that field. Not nearby, not random, directly in it. I'm not exaggerating when I say it happened every single time there was a strong storm. I could be watching from my living room window, counting the seconds between thunder, and sure enough, one bolt would slam down right in the middle of that field. Sometimes more than one, sometimes the same spot, over and over. At first, I told myself it was just elevation or moisture or coincidence. Flat land, standing water, conductive soil. There were logical explanations. But logic stopped working when I realized it didn't matter where the storm came from. North, south, east, west. Didn't matter. The lightning always found that field. I asked my neighbor about it once, casually, while we were both checking mail after a storm. He'd lived there his whole life. I joked about the field being cursed or something. He didn't laugh. He just said, "Yeah, that's where it goes." Then he changed the subject. Over time, the strikes left marks, burned patches of dirt, small craters, dead grass that never fully recovered. The field started to look scarred, even when the weather was calm. One night in late August, the storm rolled in faster than expected. No warning on the app, no sirens, just a sudden drop in temperature and that heavy, still feeling in the air. I was sitting on my porch watching the clouds build when the first lightning strike hit the field. It was close enough that I felt it in my chest. Then another, then another. They were coming faster than usual. Not random flashes across the sky, but direct hits to the same area, over and over. That's when I noticed something new. The lightning wasn't spreading out. It was tightening. Each strike hit closer to the same exact point, like it was narrowing in. I went inside and stood at the front window. Rain started coming down hard, but visibility stayed decent because the lightning kept illuminating the area. On the fifth or sixth strike, I saw something I hadn't seen before. A shape. At first, I thought it was steam or smoke rising from the ground, but it stayed there between strikes. Tall, narrow, slightly bent forward. I leaned closer to the glass. It looked like someone standing in the field. That didn't make sense. No one would be out there in that storm. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. Another strike hit. For a brief second, the shape was clearer. It wasn't moving. It was facing my house. My first instinct was to grab my phone and call someone. I don't know who. Police, maybe. But when I unlocked my phone, there was no signal. Not even emergency. The power went out right after that. The house went dark, and the only light came from the lightning outside. I backed away from the window, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt. Then the lightning stopped. Not gradually, completely. The storm continued. Rain and wind still heavy, but no more lightning. The field went dark. I stood there for a long time, waiting for another flash, another look. Nothing happened. Eventually, Storm passed. The next morning, I went out to the edge of the road and looked at the field. There was a deep burn mark in the center, larger than any I'd seen before. The ground looked dug up, like something had forced its way out or been pulled from below. I walked closer than I ever had before. In the middle of the burn area, there was a metal object sticking out of the ground. At first, I thought it was scrap, an old pipe or a piece of farm equipment. I grabbed a shovel from my shed and started digging. I didn't get far before I hit wood. Old wood. I stopped immediately. I stood there, shovel in hand, feeling stupid for even starting. My mind went to places I didn't want it to go. I covered the spot back up and went inside. That afternoon, I went to the county records office. I didn't tell them what I found. I just asked about the land across from mine. The clerk looked uncomfortable almost immediately. She told me the land used to belong to the county, not privately owned, not farmed. It had been set aside a long time ago for temporary use. I asked what that meant. She said, burials. Unmarked ones, from the late 1800s to early 1900s. Transients, prisoners, people who died without family, during outbreaks and overcrowding. I asked why it was never moved. She said, because no one wanted to. That night, another storm came through. I didn't watch from the window this time. I sat in my hallway with the lights off, listening to the rain. When the lightning started again, it struck the field. Same spot, over and over. And just before the power went out, I saw something through the narrow hallway window. The shape was closer to the road now, and it was no longer facing my house.